very frustrating for us. Felt it was very unfair. We knew he was disabled, he was medically disabled, he had been hospitalized, and yet because of the time limit on the application, the pension was denied.
That was Susan Stoyanoff. Her father, like many other disabled people, was denied a disability pension because he applied too late. Later, we'll hear how the rules are being challenged in government and in the courts. You're watching DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. We'll also look at the controversy surrounding a new technique which can help profoundly deaf people to hear, cochlear implants. First, here's this week's roundup of disability news.
Last Sunday was a landmark date for disability rights in the United States. When the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, was passed in 1990, it included a schedule to phase in legislation which prohibits discrimination based on disabilities. On January the 26th, the first phase kicked in, requiring local and state governments and business to provide accessible services, facilities, and telecommunications to persons with disabilities. While the legislation has met with compliance, it has raised concern by some in the business community. NBC's Henry Champ took a look at this issue last week before the legislation came into effect.
Whether deaf, blind, paralyzed, these students at Maryland's Rehabilitation Center have always been able to unlock the secrets of the computer, and now they have the chance of a real job. Laurel Buck was a much-recruited Japanese translator who traveled the world. She spent a year with the Peace Corps in Botswana, had a pilot's license, and then 3 years ago, a traffic accident. She has struggled through painful therapy to regain control of her body. She has also mastered the computer.
I intend to have a career and keep doing things.
And you don't think your life's over?
No, I don't.
This is a complicated computer-designed drafting plan.
Once the draft is plotted out, you can't tell who's done it. I mean, you know, a person with a disability or a normal person.
Bob Sander lost both arms in an industrial accident. Patiently and persistently, he not only mastered the computer, but drafting, a subject he knew nothing about. And now, Sander has a job offer. The disabled are convincing businessmen they can work. But there is resistance when it comes to providing those same disabled with reasonable access.
You want to be as independent as possible. It's mostly frustrating. You feel like people just don't care if you get the things you need or not.
Making business more accessible costs money. But big chains like Safeway, working with the disabled, are learning those costs are often overrated.
Really, they just need to have a person assigned to reach some of these items on the top shelves. I mean, we understand that the space is limited, and we want to educate, not litigate.
But some lawyers and so-called Disability Act experts are warning businessmen that waves of legal suits are coming. Brochures with headlines saying, "Avoiding a lawsuit avalanche," endorse the hiring of these experts as protection against charges of discrimination.
What people with disabilities want is to be integrated in society and not close business down.
So it is with some stress that the new law arrives on Sunday. But back at the computer class, there is some new hope.
Just sitting there, you know, watching TV, becoming a couch potato or what have you, can tear you apart.
For today, Henry Champ, NBC News, Washington.
Thanks to vaccines, polio is largely thought of as a disease of the past. But the past has come back to haunt some people who contracted polio in the 1950s. Pierre Mignot has the story.
Richard Groot exercises every day to make sure he'll be able to walk up these stairs. He was paralyzed by polio when he was 4 years old. Now at 41, his body is starting to get weaker at a faster rate.
the generalized fatigue, which is very common to the syndrome. The second is the pain, in my case, it's my two knees, the joints that were affected originally by the polio. And the third is a weakening of the muscles, and this one is a little bit awkward because from time to time you'll be walking or carrying things or whatever, and your legs, you basically just give out, and you potentially can collapse if you don't catch yourself, if you can.
What Richard Groot has is post-polio syndrome. Researchers say Groot's nerve cells are rapidly wearing out as he enters middle age.
It's not a reactivation of the polio virus. There is something very complicated going on with the muscle that had lost its motor nerve supply. It turns out that we're capable of overcoming that loss, but this mechanism is not indefinitely stable. So with the passage of decades, the muscle fibers that had recovered in strength begin to lose their nerve supply all over again, although very slowly.
Okay, I'd just like to show you these x-rays of a patient that we just saw.
The Montreal Neurological Institute is following the cases of 300 victims of post-polio syndrome. They say as many as 2,500 cases could show up in Quebec.
In general, it has been found that patients who have had increased severity of acute polio, in other words, people who have had involvement of all four limbs and have had respiratory involvement, are at increased risk for developing post-polio syndrome later on in life. And also, it has been found that people who had a greater functional recovery after acute polio may be at increased risk for developing post-polio syndrome later on in life.
So the question becomes, how far is this deterioration going to go? Where are we going to be 10 or 15 years from now?
That's the question Richard Groot is asking himself, still fighting a disease which everybody thought had been stopped 40 years ago. Pierre Mignot, CBC News, Montreal.
And that's this week's roundup of Disability News.
Coming up, the frustration of not knowing the rules, Canada Pension Plan disability benefits, and the consequences of applying too late.
People with disabilities often fall through the cracks because of government bureaucracy or rules that are not very well known. Shefali Sajani has one of those stories this week. Shefali?
Thanks, Joe. Many people don't know the rules for applying for Canada Pension Plan disability benefits. They are complex, so I won't go into a lot of detail. Essentially, your eligibility is based on the amount of time that you have made contributions to the CPP. You must have made contributions within 2 of the last 3 years or 5 of the last 10. And there are limitations on the time for application. Effectively, that could restrict the amount of time that you have to apply for the benefit to as little as 15 months. Not a lot of time. Earlier, I spoke to 3 people who'd like to see the system change. Harry Beattie is with the Advocacy Resource Centre for the Handicapped, ARCH. Alan Redway is a member of Parliament. He introduced a private member's bill last fall that would make more people eligible for benefits, especially those who've made contributions for a significant length of time. Susan Stoyanov has faced the dilemma firsthand. Her father, Carl, had Parkinson's disease. He applied for disability pension. His application was rejected because he was too late. He died 12 years later without a disability pension. Susan Stoyanov told me what happened when he first decided to apply for benefits.
Yes, he should have applied for the disability pension in 1976 when he stopped working, but unfortunately he wasn't aware of it at that time and didn't apply until a few years later. And actually it was a few months past the deadline when we finally did apply for the pension, and it was denied because he had applied too late. This was very frustrating for us. Felt it was very unfair. We knew he was disabled, he was medically disabled, he had been hospitalized, and yet because of the time limit on the application, the pension was denied.
And it was a hard and fast rule. You couldn't, there was no way around it.
That's right. They would not look at medical evidence after that. If you don't apply within a certain time limit, you don't get the pension and you're excluded forever.
Mr. Beatty, you represent people like Ms. Stoyanov. Can you tell me what exactly is the discriminatory aspect of this piece of legislation?
Well, it's discriminatory against people with disabilities because other benefits under the Canada Pension Plan, especially the retirement pension, are not denied simply because the person has applied too late. But disabled people, such as Susan's father, who may not have known about the disability pension, who may have been receiving other benefits for a time, or who may have thought they would get better and get back to work, just don't apply and the benefits are gone forever.
Now, you're actually pursuing this in the courts. Can you tell me where you're at with it?
We have a number of cases at different stages of appeal. We have not had a case go as high as yet as the federal court, only the lower levels of appeal, but we're pursuing a number of cases through the legal system at the present time.
Mr. Redway, Mr. Beatty is a lawyer and is obviously using the courts to try to help his clients. But you're a politician. Can you tell me what the government is doing about it?
Well, the government until recently hasn't been doing anything really about this problem. I first became aware of it back in 1984 prior to the election at that time, and raised the issue with the Minister of National Health and Welfare after that election. I didn't get very far with he and his staff, but eventually I was told that they finally saw the problem and that they would make sure that there were changes made to the Canada Pension Plan to correct the problem when further amendments were introduced. Unfortunately, further amendments weren't introduced until this year. It was at that stage that I introduced a private member's bill on the subject.
Can you tell me what your bill is going to do, how it's going to help the situation?
Well, yes,
too technical.
It does help to clear away much of this time limit problem for making an application for the bill. In a nutshell, it means that people who have contributed for 1/3 of their contributory period are going to be entitled to a pension, a disability pension, no matter when they make their application. And so one of the great injustices from my point of view that Mr. Stoyanov and others have suffered here is that they've made contributions for years and years and years to this plan, but they're now no longer entitled to receive the benefits of the plan just because they failed to make an application within the time limit. This bill is going to help that to a very significant extent.
Ms. Stoyanov, if your father were alive today, would this bill have made it possible for him to receive a benefit, do you think?
Yeah, well, today it wouldn't, but it would have helped him in 1982.
Yeah.
He would have had sufficient contributions to qualify for the pension in 1982, and it would have given him a better retirement pension.
Mr. Beatty, does the bill go far enough in dealing with the discriminatory aspects of the Canada Pension Plan legislation in terms of how it discriminates?
It certainly addresses many of the most difficult cases, and I think Mr. Redway deserves a great deal of credit for pursuing this remedy. But it doesn't help absolutely everyone who may have lost their benefits because of a late application. And certainly we will pursue, through law reform and litigation, efforts to help everyone who has lost their pension because of this.
It's highly unusual for a private member's bill to go through Parliament, but that's what happened with Alan Redway's bill, Bill C-280. It received unanimous support last November in the House of Commons. Currently, it is facing a procedural objection in the Senate. The Speaker of the Senate is expected to rule on the objection in February. And it still has to be ratified by 2/3 of the provinces with 2/3 of the population.
Coming up next on DNet, a new medical procedure has raised concerns in the deaf community. Most people accept advances in medicine or technology as being beneficial, a step forward for people with disabilities. But sometimes disabled people have a different opinion, and they feel that personal and social considerations are not always taken into account when new technology is introduced. Recently, people who are deaf have raised concerns about a new implant procedure that improves hearing. Avis Favreau of Global News has the story.
David, where did you get this thing?
I made it.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
You did?
Several times each month, 5-year-old David Bloom takes special classes where he learns to listen.
Can you say hello?
Hello.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
David, listen, what's your name?
David.
A bout of meningitis as an infant left him profoundly deaf. Conventional hearing aids didn't help. And so his parents chose a new alternative, a cochlear implant.
He's had the implant for 3 years now. From that time, during those 3 years, he's gone from a totally non-hearing, non-speaking child to a hearing, speaking, animated, verbal child.
Max Bloom says his son is now integrated in a regular school program. He's learning not only English, but also Hebrew and French.
The light melt.
The implant is essentially a surgically implanted hearing aid.
This is the part of the device that sits in the skull, and this is the electrode, and it has 22 electrodes on it. And this is the part that actually gets threaded into the inner ear.
Attached to the outside will be a microphone connected to a small box containing a speech processor. Sound is converted to electrical signals, and when passed through the electrodes, they will stimulate hairs in the cochlea, which transmit sounds to the brain.
There is an urgency to doing it because
Dr. Julian Nedzalski is one of a handful of specialists in Canada trained to implant the unit. While it doesn't restore hearing, many wearers, he says, will hear enough to develop speech. And the earlier profoundly deaf children receive the implant, the better their nervous systems will adapt.
we're going to take advantage of the technology and have the child develop to his or her full potential, then this must be done when the child is young rather than older.
Max Bloom had to pay for David's implant done in New York. Now the Ontario government is considering funding the $16,000 implant for adults and particularly for children who qualify.
As an option for children, want it stopped.
Henry Whalen and the Ontario Association for the Deaf have vowed to protest and lobby to stop children from receiving the implants.
It's very similar to child abuse. You know, you are abusing the child's body. I think that they have to wait until the child themselves can make the decision, when they're 18, let us say.
Not only have the long-term effects not been adequately studied, Whalen argues the devices do not cure deafness, and like other aids, the technology will eventually fail.
I believe that in the long run, that parents will thank us.
I think it's child abuse to neglect the child and not to do anything you possibly can for him to have the best possible quality of life.
While sympathetic to the concerns of the deaf community, Dr. Nedzalski believes a ban on funding would shut an important window of opportunity.
The world today is really a hearing world, and that people should be given the option.
Eden Vries is a bright, happy 10-year-old who is also profoundly deaf. Her parents investigated the implant but decided against it.
It's not going to change the fact of our kids' deafness, and that's the most important part, you know. I mean, it seemed like an impediment in accepting our daughter as she was.
Their research showed the implants have a 50% success rate, a rate doctors argue is much higher. But the Vries support the parents' right to choose.
That's the function of a parent. You make decisions for your kid, and you live with those decisions, good or bad.
Still, they and members of the deaf community are skeptical of pressure from the medical side to have the implants done.
And the doctors truly do not care. I believe that they don't care. I believe it's a buck, and you know, as long as they get their fees and whatever, that's fine.
But there are other costs to be considered.
The cost to the society of keeping a child in a special educational environment because he has a hearing impairment and can only communicate by sign or cannot speak and not be integrated is much greater than the cost of an implant.
The answer may not come for many years, until this first generation of children with the implant have grown and either abandoned this new technology in favor of deaf culture, or in fact used it to adapt to the hearing world.
A few weeks ago on DNET, we looked at how language can be used to label people. In particular, we heard strong objections to the use of the word retarded.
Many of you called in to the DNET opinion line, and here's some of your reactions. This call is from Rosanna Minioni of Montreal.
I think that a label such as mentally retarded is extremely negative. I work with people with disabilities in the community, and whenever I come in interaction with other people, I always correct them on the kind of language that they're using.
Diana Friedman, who works as a speech pathologist in Calgary, thinks many people are confused by the name of the organization that advocates for people with developmental disabilities, the Canadian Association for Community Living.
And I really appreciate your disagreement with the term mentally retarded and how it makes people feel. But equally, I think that you are doing yourselves a disservice by going with a name like the Association for Community Living, because nobody outside your association then has any clue as to what you stand for. I think you have to find another term that's acceptable to you and comprehensible to the public.
Raleigh Orr of Truro, Nova Scotia, feels that language plays an important role in shaping our perceptions of people with disabilities.
Perhaps I don't have time on this short message to record my opinion on acceptable terminology, but I simply wanted to say that I think it is crucial to breaking down the barriers for people with disabilities.
We'd like to thank everyone who called in.
We'll be looking at transportation in a future program, so this week we'd like you to give us a call and answer the question, what's your biggest beef about transportation? We'll give you the DNET opinion line number at the end of the show.
Ahead on DNET, a television station reaches out to the public, but not all of it.
City Television in Toronto prides itself on its progressiveness. One of the station's stated goals is to broaden the range of voices on television. To this end, City created a video booth called Speaker's Corner, where anybody can record their thoughts on tape. Anybody, that is, except many of Metro Toronto's 300,000 disabled citizens.
Welcome to City TV's Speaker's Corner. Do-it-yourself television by the people, for the people.
This is the Chum City building. It houses a local television station and much music. One of the more innovative things this television station has done is it's asked for the opinions of its viewers. For a loony, you can drop in the slot here back in the speaker's booth and have 2 minutes to give your opinion on the television programming.
Hi there, Moses. Speaker's Corner is a great show, except there are a couple of things that bother me. Firstly, how come on some episodes you don't have a winner? What is it? Are you too cheap to give some of those prizes you're giving away? You own the damn station. Just give them away and be happy about it.
Pretty interesting idea. The only problem here is that this video booth, the Speaker's Corner as it's called, is not accessible to people in wheelchairs or to people in scooters like me. Well, I guess I'm going to have to spend my looting on something else today. Maybe a nice hot cup of chocolate on a very cold day. Speaker's Corner is not only inaccessible to people with mobility impairments. If you're blind, you wouldn't be able to read the visual countdown that indicates when the camera starts recording.
And finally, DNET needs your help. Federal government funding for the program runs out in 7 weeks. Our efforts to have the show refunded by Ottawa would be greatly strengthened if you would send us a letter telling us why DNET should continue to serve people with disabilities, their friends, and supporters.
You can write a letter or you can fax us at CBC. We'll pass on your messages of support to the government departments that are looking at our request. Our address and fax number are coming up in a moment. And thanks for your help.
That's our show. I'm Susan Pettit.
And I'm Joe Coughlin. See you again next week. And remember, let us know your biggest beef about transportation. Give us a call on the DNET opinion line, area code 416-921-7933. That's area code 416-921-7933.
Or you can write to us. Our address is the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. You can fax us at 416-975-5636.